Hello, ladies and gents. I am your host, Fanboy X, and I am back with another episode of Comics Talk. And as promised, I have read and I'm going to review Garth Ennis's run on The Shadow. Oh boy. Let's talk about what I did like before we get into what I dislike. Now, I want to say, right off the bat, this is an interesting take on The Shadow, but not my favorite take on The Shadow. Alright, so, what did I like? Good artwork by Aaron Campbell, who also did work on Ultimates for Marvel. The story itself was pretty good. It involved the Japanese just before the start of World War II, trying to get what they needed to build this huge death ray thing, and yeah, classic pulp magazine stuff right there, comic books in general. I did like that. I liked the plot. The artwork was pretty good. So I can't complain there. I like that Garth Ennis also combined the Shadow's pulp magazine origins with the one given to him in the 1994 movie. So you have Kent Allard, a World War I fighter pilot and spy who disappears, shows back up in the Orient as Lamont Cranston and becomes an opium lord. Then one day, Lamont Cranston disappears, and something lethal comes back in his wake. So, we get the pulp magazine origin, the blend of the movie origin, and then Ennis starts throwing in his own interpretation, and that's where I feel that this failed. Like I said, this was a more lethal Shadow. In fact, hold on a minute. Okay, I'm back. Here's what I mean. This is from issue 1, and he ambushes some Japanese smugglers at a dock, and you can just see all the blood and carnage. Yes, the Shadow did put his 1911s to use in other mediums, but it was not nearly this savage. We're getting into like Punisher Noir or the Spider levels of brutality here. I mean, just look at that guy that got shot in the back of the head and is like, no, Ennis, no. So that's really where my fondness for this particular version of the Shadow starts to diminish. I like what was done with the origin, but I don't like that it was such a lethal interpretation. That works with a lot of characters, but to me it does not work with the Shadow. Yes, like I said, the Shadow did use his 1911s. He had no qualms using his 1911s. But he was all about, like, stealth, detective, spy, blending into the shadows, then coming out to fight the criminals. Basically Batman before there was Batman. Like, if you were... the Shadow was the inspiration for Batman, so if you're looking for the old school Shadows level of lethal, go the early Golden Age where he carried the gun and would use it, but still stuck primarily to stealth and detective stuff. So that's kind of what killed this interpretation of the Shadow for me, was just the lethalness of his methods. Especially after having come off of reading one of the old magazine reprints. Matter of fact, it was from the first Shadow story ever, and man, it was amazing, and it really focused on the detective work side of the Shadow. I'm going off of what I know with the Shadow. Personally, I have some more of the novel reprints from like later on down the line. Maybe his methods got more lethal, but I don't think so. Like when they were announcing this series, it was clearly stated that this was meant to be a new interpretation of the Shadow. Another thing, they gave the Shadow his mind-clouding ability from the radio show and the 1994 movie that I liked. And they introduced a pretty new spin on it. He could actually make people not see him, but he could also make people see things that weren't there as well, which I thought was an interesting take on it. So good on you there, Ennis. He has a limited form of clairvoyance, which, if it had been any other character, I'd be like, okay, that's interesting. It makes the Shadow nose come off like a poorly made pun, though, by the time you get to the clairvoyance part. Then he had this weird ability that didn't explain it fully. He could somehow still get information from people. I don't know if he like went on a different plane or what, but he could still extract information. He could interrogate them post-mortem, we'll say, which was something new thrown into the mix as well. There's a 6-issue arc called The Fires of Creation. I found it at a flea market. I was like, hey, might as well give it a shot. I like the Shadow, see what Dynamite do with it. I wanted to see if I liked it as much as Masks. I don't, personally. It did have some good cover art, though. So, like, this variant. Now that's the Shadow. That's very Shadow right there. I also like, hopefully the Mylar bag won't make it glare too much. There we go. I like this cover because the scarf comes up and forms the S for the name. That's brilliantly, that's well done right there. So this was a 6-issue arc called The Fires of Creation. Like I said, it involves the conspiracy involving the Japanese prior to World War II, and it's interesting for that respect. As I've said in reviews that I've done of comic books, movies, anything in the past, opinion is subjective, as it should be. So I am not going to sit here and say this version of the Shadow sucks. No. Somebody else might enjoy this take on the Shadow. It was just not my personal preference, because I'm not used to seeing the Shadow being that lethal and Punisher-like. I'm more used to seeing him be Batman-like, but still with no qualms with using a 1911 when need be. For the best example, I would recommend of what I mean, watch the 1994 movie. But, like I said, somebody else might come along and enjoy this series, and I've only read the first 6 issues. There's still 20 of them out there that I haven't read. So, I don't know. One of my favorite Shadow, but I do highly, and I will do a thing on this probably sometime later on down the road, of Masks. I love that was for me, that was just right. And Masks, ironically, was running at the same time that this version of the Shadow was, yet also completely separate from each other. That series, it was a team-up between Shadow, the Green Hornet, and Kato, Zorro, and some other characters. But to me, that was a really good take on the Shadow. used his 1911s. He did kill a guy, but he's still, again, all about stealth and intimidation and stuff, you know. To me, that was the Shadow compared to what Garth Ennis did. But that's my 2 cents. I do recommend trying the series out for yourself. It might catch on. It was pretty popular, I will say that. It's just not my personal preference. But that has been my review on The Shadow. Do not take a shot for every time I say The Shadow. I want to see you back in another video, not in the hospital having your stomach pumped for being a dipstick. Okay? So, Shadow, 6-issue arc, Fires of Creation. Good conspiracy story. Good artwork. A good blending of the origins, but of the lethal aspect. Where the Shadow was considered himself to be an agent of death. Yes, he says that. Not the Shadow to me. But will you like the series when you read it? Only the Shadow knows. Well, I am signing off. This is Fanboy X, over and out.